Hi, and welcome to week 4. This week we get to dive into animation fully. Most of the times in animation you'll start with a ball bounce and then go directly to a walk cycle. So you've made it to walk cycles. It is kind of the basis in which we get to look at all the principles, use them all, get an entire rig involved. When you're doing this walk cycle, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but make sure that you're kind of moving every controller possible. If you're not, maybe you brought the shoulders into it, but you haven't adjusted the back, and if the back doesn't move, it's going to get stiff. All right, so we've got in our module 4 here, our walk cycle information, sorry about that, discussion on staging and animation. Then we've got your walk cycle, and then 4.3, I know this gets a little bit confusing, but it's a chance to make sure that you've got everything complete. So 4.3 is going to be the arm completely done and the IK character completely done and skinned. Okay, so last Sunday was just the human IK setup, and then all you'll need to do is skin it for this week and fix up anything that you need to. Okay, feel free to let me know if you have any questions on any of this. In this video, I'm going to talk about your walk cycle. Okay, Richard Williams has a book called The Animator's Survival Kit, and this page here, and I just Googled Richard Williams walk cycle. You can pull it up. I can also attach it if need be or want, but it really breaks it down nicely. No matter how you are doing a walk cycle, if it's a character walk cycle, you're always going to deal with 4 main poses. Those poses are going to be, I'll just click on this one for right now, your contact, down, passing, and up pose. Okay, and then you go to the contact again and it'll just be with the other foot. So contact, couple things to note. Your front leg is straight, the heel is up. That being said, when we create this contact pose in Maya, you don't want to overextend the leg or have it be completely straight. You want to give it just a little bend. Why is that? Because you're going to get a pop when you start to look through your cycle and view it, because the knee is going straight bent, and so it's kind of jerking to get to that complete straightness. So if you find that there's a little bit of jerk in your animation, just give it a slight bend. Does not need to be bent, just not over straightened. You'll have your back leg slightly bent and be on your toe. Okay? Then we'll go to the down. This is where both knees are bent, and this imagery is a little exaggerated. You'll see when you go to make your own, if you do both legs really bent, it's going to be a very thick up, down walk cycle. Whereas most of us kind of scuff our feet, we don't pick it up that high, we don't bend our knees that much. So that's where you get to see it and determine how much exaggeration you want to add. In the down pose, your arms will be the furthest out that they will be. Okay, so sometimes when I'm dealing with the arms, I'll start with my down pose. Maybe I'll start with my legs to get contact, down, passing, and up, and then I'll go through again and start my arms on the down and then fill in the rest. Pay attention to these S curves that are being made. Your hips and head should always be the same distance apart. So if we're going down and up, they're going to be the same. You're also going to want to turn left and right. So think about which arm is forward. That's going to bring that shoulder forward. And then you're going to kind of bring that shoulder up as well. There's called contrapposto movement, which is where if I'm looking straight at you, if your right hip is up, then your right shoulder is going to be up. We're creating kind of like greater than, less than signs as you move along. I tend to start looking at my walk cycle in the profile, and then I'll go to the front to fix and add that kind of movement in the shoulders and hips. You'll find what works best for you, and just take it one piece at a time, and then you can, move forward from there. All right? Notice, again, it's exaggerated, but the wrists are going to move as well. You're going to kind of bring your hand forward with the wrist and then flip it and bring the wrist back, and then the hand follows. All right? Now, we are doing a cycle for games, so a looping cycle. What this means is that your foot is going to always have to stay centered. Now, this one here, where we have the foot overlapping, that would be a walk cycle for a movie. Basically, when you plant your foot down, it's not going to go anywhere until you pick it up again. One of my greatest pet peeves is if you're doing a walk cycle for an animation or a movie or something, that the feet slide. It's not allowed. For a looping one, it is completely allowed. Now, why do we loop? What does looping mean? Well, let's say I'm just going to move this character like this. Okay? In a looping walk cycle, you always want to stay centered. You want to be over the 0, 0, 0 axis. So if you would like, just make sure your character, and we can look at like a side view here. We can see these lines, grid lines, are my 0, 0, 0 point. I'm going to make sure on the ground and centered. Your character will always be centered over that 0, 0, 0 axis. No matter where the character goes, no matter how they're moving, you want them to be centered. Okay? So, you know, even when if I were to go now and I would do my down pose, and then I would do my passing, but if, let's say I'm doing my passing, instead of moving forward in space, I'm actually going to just move up in space, bring that leg in, and do, you know, depending upon which leg, my passing pose is going to be centered still on that 0, 0, 0 axis line. You do need to still pay attention to weight, where we're carrying it. You know, if I was doing something where my hips were out, I would need to counterbalance it, that kind of thing. Still very important, but you're always going to be centered, okay? Center, very important. Now, why do we do that for games? Because you have a controller or a keyboard or a mouse, and you tell the game what direction you want to go in. So we would just have a forward, a left or right, and a back, and then with using the you know, controller, keyboard, whatever, you are actually saying how many steps the character is going to take and in which direction. Whereas in an animation, I know, you know, the character needs to take 7 steps in whatever direction. Okay? So, again, starting your walk cycle. Timing is important. It's something to think about. I tend to do a second per foot and then take it from there. So, let's see here. And we can go to 5. You can always have your human IK open. Sometimes if this is off-center, just go back to definition, and then you can go to controls again. Most of these have some nice controllers set up, but you can always grab things in here. Okay? I think we've talked about it in the past, but if you are not aware, you can always see where there are dotted lines here. You can click and drag to adjust your panel setup. So if you wanted to make one bigger, one smaller, what I tend to do is like to have a front panel or a side panel. Actually, let's do side. That's going to be so that I can make sure I'm always centered on that line, and my perspective here so I can kind of navigate around and do whatever I would like. Okay? Depending upon which rig you're using, you may want to create not an empty layer, create layer from selected so that you can toggle on and off the mesh so that you can really manipulate the rig. Okay, so you know, if you're going to start with your contact pose at 0, then again, I like to just reference this to see, okay, my foot's forward. Let's click on this one so it's a little bit bigger. Foot's forward, heels up, foot's back. Okay. Now, some things you think are pretty obvious. You know, you're like, oh, well, of course I know which hand and foot go together. Don't forget, you can always get up and move around and see what you actually do when you walk. It is your opposite arm and leg. Let's give that a little bit of an up. And again, so see, this is the popping that I was talking about. So just a slight bend. You're also going to want to make sure that you're on a ground plane. So never go past the ground plane. And then this one, we'll bring back in space a little bit further. And it looks like we need to go down and down. Okay, so it's kind of a lot of back and forth. I'm going to move my whole character back just a little bit to be centered. Now, don't forget, every controller has its own timeline, its own set of keyframes. So you're going to need to select all and hit S, or as you go along, anytime you're moving something, you click on it, you hit S. Okay, so again, it's up to you if you want to start with the legs, if you want to work with the arms first, whatever works best for you, but I would highly recommend you start with your 4 key poses and then move on from there. So this one's going to be forward, and this one will be back a little. We'll get the wrist in it later. I tend to do my wrist movement after I get my 4 key poses. I consider that more of a finesse. Again, however you want to work. But then you can move forward and we're going to get to the down. So again, timing however you kind of want to work it out. Don't forget, all of our keyframes can be adjusted and moved. So just because you've set up the time you know, in one set doesn't mean you have to keep it there. So this back toe comes up, and I didn't do that in my contact, or back heel, I'm sorry. We said the arms are furthest out. Looks like he needs to move back just a little bit. And then I hit S and we can toggle back and forth so you can see the movement. Now the feet will be sliding again because it is looped. Okay? So again, my workflow is to start with the legs, making sure that I'm getting the feet, that nothing's going through the ground plane, that I'm getting those key poses down. I do my arms. And then once I've gotten my 4 key poses, then I go in, adjust the wrists, the shoulders, the head. You're going to have a little bit of a head bob, and just always keep going back to your reference. And then if you want to adjust any timing, you can just hold Shift on your keyboard and click and drag. And you can see with this, I've got a yellow arrow on either side of the red, and then there are 2 arrows on the inside. The arrows on the inside move both of your keyframes, or however many you have selected, just to adjust where they're located in your timeline. The arrows on the outside scale them proportionally, but so don't forget, if we add more space between keyframes, you're slowing down your animation. If we bring them closer together, you're speeding it up. Now, one thing that's important is if you are scaling, make sure when you're done, you right mouse click and you go to snap. What this does is when you've got lots of keyframes and you're scaling, they want to make sure it's scaled proportionally, but you may find that you're actually setting a key in between keyframes. So maybe you're at like 45.25. Well, Maya doesn't know how to reach 45.25, so you can't actually adjust that keyframe. So by snapping, it goes to the nearest whole keyframe. So see how we've got, it's not quite 17 here, but it's a little bit in between. Snap, and now it moved to 17. You'll always want to play your animation. Whatever viewport you're clicked in is where it will play. And you can use this, so if we click and drag to make this smaller, I can loop through those to see what's going on. Okay? So I hope that helps to get you started on your walk cycle. Don't forget, we've got another discussion board, the walk cycle, and finalizing and submitting your arm and human IK. Hope you have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions.